Welcome once again to the Vlog. I'm your host. The fourth Xbox was released 4 months ago, so I figured now is as good a time as any to do a 4-month review. I was a big fan of the first and second Xbox consoles. I wasn't a big fan of the Xbox One, but my hope was that Microsoft would return to form with the fourth Xbox. The Xbox Series X is a curious console with an even more curious name. Seriously, they just should have called it the Xbox 4 or something. Microsoft decided that instead of focusing on a traditional console, they decided to focus on services. If Microsoft Game Pass sounds like a good idea to you, then this very well may be the system for you. If you're not interested in the games as a service model, then the Xbox Series X is probably not for you. One thing that they focused on in their messaging was that you could play 4 generations of Xbox, which is technically true, but it's very deceptive. For me, the most important thing for backwards compatibility is that the games are actually compatible. So with that in mind, I don't think backwards compatibility on the Series X is very good at all. The original Xbox had 997 games. Of those, only 38 are compatible with the Xbox Series X. So that's 3.8% of all original Xbox games. I guess a bit of my disappointment is a bit on me because I just assumed that they'd all work. But 4% is just really bad. I wanted to play Gun Valkyrie, but it didn't work. It took me about 10 games to finally find one that did work on the system, and then I found the list. Now, backwards compatibility with the Xbox 360 is better, but is still pretty unacceptable based on their claims. The Xbox Series X plays 448 of the 2,154 Xbox 360 games. That's only 20.8%. They've also broken all the games made for their first-party accessory, the Kinect. Now, I've been playing a lot of Dance Central 3 on my Xbox. With the Kinect as part of my routine, I went from being morbidly obese to having a healthy BMI, so I just think it's a great device. I know others may disagree. The other Xbox One games that don't require the Kinect pretty much all work, with very few exceptions. Hopefully it gets better over time, but given how they're doing it, I wouldn't expect it to get much better. I'm not even sure if it's correct to say that the games are truly backwards compatible. Traditionally, if you wanted to play an old game on a new system that supported backwards compatibility, you just put the game into the system and played the game. With the Xbox Series X, you put in the disc, but without an internet connection, the system doesn't recognize it. The console has to download the entire game, and the disc simply acts as a DRM key to let you play. So it kinda just gives you a free download of the game that you already own, as opposed to being backwards compatible in the traditional sense. So it really just limits you to whatever is on the Microsoft Store at the time. Now, I didn't exactly purchase an Xbox Series X to play Sneak King, but I don't really understand why I can't play it if Microsoft is touting backwards compatibility as a major selling point of their new console. There are a lot of really good arcade shooters on the Xbox 360 that I would have loved to have played on my Xbox Series X, so it's pretty disappointing. Death Smiles 2X was released as a digital-only import Xbox 360 game, and it doesn't work either. None of the Xbox Live indie titles work, and that includes the classic title I Made a Game with Zombies in It. Honestly, if backwards compatibility wasn't such a big selling point by Microsoft, I wouldn't be upset about it, and I would have just waited for Halo Infinite to buy the new console. Another thing to keep in mind is that the Xbox Series X is not for you if you have bad internet, a tight data cap, or if you have no internet at all. Without an internet connection, you cannot set up the Xbox Series X, and if your internet is not good, then your Xbox Series X will have major fits. I live in a very rural area, and my first 2 months with the system were absolutely terrible. I've since had access to get the T-Mobile home internet service, and it's been much better. The always online nature of the Xbox Series X means it has some really ridiculous DRM. So if your internet goes out due to an ice storm, or if Xbox Live is down for any reason, you can't play any of your games. Even if you have the disc, it doesn't matter. You still can't play the game. I thought their tiny Xbox 4, the Series X, would be a perfect travel console to play in your hotel room, but without a stable internet connection, it would be pretty much useless for that purpose. Physical games are also pretty much useless with the Xbox Series X. I picked up Gears 5 physically, but I still had to download the entire game to play it. They've also made it intentionally confusing to know which games are currently in the drive. Microsoft isn't even releasing all of their games physically anymore. The Medium, their first exclusive game for the system, is digital only. Now I know all this sounds really negative, but it's not all bad, and I think this could be the perfect console for some people. Let's say you don't really care about playing old games and you just want the latest and greatest games. I think it's fair to say that most people buy consoles to play new games, not games that are close to 20 years old. Let's say you don't have horses like I do, but instead you live in an area where you have fast and stable internet. So you're good to go when it comes to downloading giant files, and if you don't care about physical media, then you're good to go in that regard too. On the plus side, if you're a big Xbox fan, the experience is a lot better than it was in the past. The system itself is very fast and snappy. The older titles that are compatible often work better than they would on their original hardware. The operating system is basically the same as it was for the Xbox One X. They haven't even updated the logos for the new system. I'm guessing they're going to get around to doing that. The controller, it's fine. I'm not a big fan of the new shape, but it's not that bad. I'm also not a big fan of the use of AA batteries, but it's serviceable. I do like the rumble on the controller, and I'm looking forward to getting a custom controller whenever Xbox Design Labs backs up later this year. One really incredible thing that they've done is the Xbox Adaptive Controller, and they're supporting it for the new console. It allows more people to access games for those who cannot play games on a standard controller. I think Microsoft should get a lot of credit for the adaptive controller, and I think their competitors should offer something similar in the future for their customers. Microsoft will also be releasing a headset of their own in response to Sony's headset. I'll be interested in picking one up later this month. Game capture works fairly well, but for some reason it's limited to 2 minutes when recording internally. I don't particularly understand that choice, but it can be expanded to 1 hour if you use a USB 3 thumb drive. However, you can't move videos that are stored internally to an external drive. It can only be saved to the cloud, which is pretty inconvenient for me. Another issue with capturing gameplay on external storage on the new Xbox is that you can't really do it without a Windows computer, and that was the same problem with the Xbox One. You have to format it to NTFS, which is something you cannot do on a Macintosh. With a PlayStation 5, you can just format the drive using the system settings on the system. It's not a particularly huge deal for most people, but it is still pretty annoying for me. When it comes to expandability, you can buy a proprietary 1 terabyte SSD memory card, which works just as fast as the internal memory, or use an external drive for archival purposes, something that you cannot currently do with the PlayStation 5. In my view, the Xbox Series X is a platform for their games as a service model. For $15 a month, you can download and rent all of the games that are currently available. But unlike the Zune Pass, you don't get to keep anything like you did with Zune. Games come onto the service and games leave the service. As it is now, I think the service works very well, and I could see myself using it on and off throughout any given year. However, I'm very skeptical about the $15 a month or $180 a year in the long term. In July 2020, Xbox Games marketing manager Aaron Greenberg gave an interview with GameSpot where he mentioned that Game Pass isn't a big profit play. Now, Microsoft isn't a charity. They've also been on a bit of a spending spree, buying major studios like Bethesda. So eventually they're going to want to make money, make a big profit on all those big capital investments. Hopefully, profitability happens with the increased volume of the individuals that they hope to subscribe to Game Pass, but I still suspect that the price is going up. Recently, they did try to double the price for Xbox Live Gold before they backed off after they got a lot of backlash. But I suspect that had more to do with them trying to discontinue the old Xbox Live Gold service more so than anything. I think the most notable thing about the launch is that they launched with no new first-party titles. The library for a launch console is usually very light, but this is really unprecedented. The Nintendo 64 only had Mario 64 and Pilot Wing 64 at launch, but at least it was something. That's not to say that there weren't any games to play or new third-party games to play at launch, but I do feel that Microsoft really dropped the ball on this one. But I do think that with what's going on in the world right now, that probably had a lot to do with it. I know this all sounds really negative, but I don't hate my Xbox Series X. However, I wouldn't have picked one up at launch if they were more clear about the always-on nature of the console, or if I knew about the backwards compatibility issues that it has. I do think that the Xbox 4 has a lot of potential, but it still has a long way to go. We're still very much in the launch phase of the console, so it will be interesting to see where they go from here. I want to thank you again for watching my review, and I want to remind you that I was not compensated for this review and I was not given any review products from Microsoft. I did use the coupon that came with the Xbox 4 to try out Game Pass, but I paid the prevailing rate that everyone else had access to. I also want to remind you not to subscribe to this channel, and I want to remind you not to ring any of those bells. I don't know what any of that does, and it all seems rather risky to me. I'm just a guy learning how to make videos on his Macintosh, so it's better not to do anything risky. I also want to ask you not to follow me because that's just weird. Thank you again, and I hope you have a wonderful day.